My name is Boyd Hilton, and I'm joined by the stars of the show, Paul Bettany and Claire Foy. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. This show is about an extraordinary woman, Margaret Campbell, Duchess of Argyll. When you first read about her, Claire, in the script, what did you make of her?
I thought she was unbelievable, really. I thought that she was incredibly vivacious and exciting and did a lot of things that I wish I had the bravery to do. But I sort of loved her. She was kind of naughty and terrible and behaved in such a childish way. But yeah, there was something about her that I just thought would be great fun to have a go at and try and capture.
Do you think she's an inspirational figure in many ways?
No, okay. I don't really think she is, only because I know her basically from the inside, and I think that in order for that to be the case, the thought behind her actions would have to be deliberate, and so much about her is not, and so much of it is motivated about her own gain and for what she can get out of situations, which makes her seem from the outside sometimes to be some sort of like proto-feminist kind of icon, but actually she's sort of disliked women a lot. I don't mean to paint her as a terrible person, but the reality of her character and who she was is that.
She's a flawed character and the flaws are there in the show, but at the same time, in that period, she faced an incredibly misogynistic kind of world, didn't she, really? So in a way, she was fighting that misogyny, do you think?
I think that all women were, because that's the world that we live in, unfortunately. And that's what you try and navigate. And I think that at that period of time, her entitlement about the fact that the behaviour and the treatment that she was getting was not what she should be. It was basically her own opinion of herself. It wasn't necessarily that women shouldn't be treated this way, which hopefully the audience will see from the outside, but that wasn't her motivation, unfortunately. I think her motivation was also admirably, though, I haven't done anything wrong, this is not the way things should be, and thinking she could change the system. But ultimately what she found out was that she can't beat the system, and the system's completely against her and against all women in that scenario at that period of time.
And Paul, do you think that the Duke at the time he was a kind of just went along with the kind of general social attitudes towards women at the time, or do you think there was something particular about him and his personality that ended up with the way that he treated the Duchess?
I think that he was a misogynist in a misogynistic world, and my version of him was sort of sadistic and enjoyed the power that he had over her, and enjoyed the game that he thought they were in together, you know. And I think he was sort of bereft when the game ends and she chooses not to be in that dynamic anymore with him. And I think she didn't really she wanted to change that dynamic between them. And in the end, she has to opt out of it.
The first time we see you together is on that extraordinary train sequence, which I love, when the two of you are kind of flirting wildly and you both seem very excited about each other. Do you think, even at that point, though, that this thing was doomed, that they're kind of getting together or they're interested in each other for the wrong reasons, possibly?
Yeah, I think all the reasons why people fall in love with one another or are attracted to someone, a lot of the time the familiarity that you feel where you're like, oh my goodness, I've known this person for such a long time, or it is basically because they represent everything that you are familiar with, which is bad for you. and I think that for them, you know, they had neither of them, in our story anyway, necessarily met somebody who was the opposite number to them in a way, the male or the female version of themselves. And I think there was a lot of similarity in the way that they behaved and their interests and things like that they recognised in each other and that they realised was exciting about each other, and that they could talk the same sort of language that they couldn't do in the society that they lived in, which was pretty, you know, restrictive English kind of aristocracy sort of, that they could kind of meet in that way. But yeah, I think there was a very physical relationship and a very instant chemistry that they had. But that isn't going to sustain a marriage, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think they sort of probably hoped that they would be able to live a different sort of life where their only law was they would never bore each other, but actually they're sort of two people with narcissistic tendencies and would have been better off with a codependent rather than finding each other.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a bad chemistry experiment, basically, is what happened when they...
They were both kind of famous figures. What do you think the story says about fame and celebrity, both at the time and now, really?
Boy, I think it's in Margaret's case, I think it's very much a poisoned chalice, or like a double-edged sword, and I think that she thinks she's in control of it, and she was in control of it, of the narrative of who she was for such a long time. But I think that when you're a public figure, what I'm realising is basically you're not in charge of how you're portrayed. It's basically journalists and people who, you know, the outside world that decides who you are, and you have very little control about trying to say, no, but I'm not really like that, I'm like this, and no one really cares. But I think in her way, she thought that she was in charge of the narrative, and that was basically her downfall, because she thought that going into it, at some point the tide would turn and everyone would go, oh, we've realised he's actually terrible and you're not in the wrong, and that was never going to happen. And I think that's probably still the case now.
Do you think our interest in fame and celebrity is still, I mean, it's even greater now possibly than it was back then?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the drumbeat has sped up. You know.
It's more disposable now. Totally was pretty quick.
You know, to squeal at the next head rolling down the Champs-Elysees. You know.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
I love the scene where you try, carrying her, you just got married, and you're going to the castle and you want to carry her over the threshold. It's kind of hilarious as well as being tragic and sad. How did you, when you read that scene in the script, what did you think of it?
How am I going to lift her?
You were supremely worried about that. I wasn't worried about it.
So worried about that.
But the scene changed a lot, actually, in discussion. I think initially it was that he wasn't going to be able to carry her, and I didn't understand how making him seem feeble would help him remain a sort of physical threat. So actually it became about sort of willfully holding this person that really was frightened and didn't want to be carried, and forcing her. And yeah, that's what that became.
And it did happen. He did carry her over the threshold, and they were both pretty advanced in years by that. You know, I mean, they weren't newlyweds. He'd been divorced twice. No, twice? Yeah, twice. Yeah. She'd been divorced once. It wasn't like it was like, no, the first flush of young love. Like, it wasn't what was supposed to happen. And it was an interesting, I think, signal of the slightly askew way in which they viewed. She went along with something that he thought was a good idea, which wasn't a particularly good idea. And it also signified, you know, that was the castle. I think the Inverera Castle in it is another character in the show, and I think that's the beginning of the fairy tale is very much over as soon as her feet hit the ground and he puts her down. It's that there's a change in the relationship and where this is going to go. Yeah,
it seems completely misguided, I have to say. I was going to ask you about the castle. So you actually filmed there in the actual place?
We did,
and does that kind of help make the whole thing come alive?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, it's the most amazing, beautiful place to spend your time. But I think...
I did think about how it's very beautiful, the area, but extraordinarily bleak. Now, you know. Going up there and being there for 2 months, you know, I wonder what must have gone through this London society girl's head when she arrived in Inverera in the late 50s or whatever, and went, what am I going to do here? There are cows.
But that's what's amazing about her. She never would have thought that. She only would have seen the opportunity of going, I'm fabulous, I shall come. And what she did do was open a cinema in the town, and they would have weekends where everybody from London would come up. That was who she was, and that's what she wanted to do. And ultimately what ended up happening was she spent a lot of time in that castle alone with a husband who was deeply distanced from her, and she didn't get the attention that she always got throughout her life, and so she acted out, basically.
But in a way, she kind of fell in love with the castle, didn't she? It feels like
very much so. I think that the castle for her represented something that she had made and that she had done, and she hadn't really done that in her life. And there is a line that Paul has in the show, which is, "What have you ever made? What have you ever created apart from yourself?" And she is proud of what she has created, but I think the castle is very much plays to her strengths of bringing people together, improving something, spending her money, And that's no small thing to her, that she has resurrected. And even now, the Duke of Argyll said, you know, we have running water, we have the structure of this house is down to her. She did everything to this house. She put her everything into the house, and it would never would have been that if you know, Margaret Wigham hadn't come along. He never would have been able to fund the renovation of that house and make it great. And she saw him, basically he is the house. Yeah. She's like, here's this guy, he's tormented from the war. Look how handsome he is, look how much he has to offer. Won't we be fabulous, us two together? We are going to be the, you know, the power couple of the London scene. She never questions that's not going to happen, ever. That's why she marries him. She's sort of a diamond in the rough.
Do you think he partly marries her because in the back of his mind he does know that he's got issues and she's pretty well off? Is that part of the whole deal?
Absolutely. I mean, I think he sees the contract, which is your money, my access to, you know, the final hurdle of her sort of social climb into the aristocracy from a wealthy industrialist father. But also I think there was real attraction between them, and that she wouldn't behave in the way that he found dull in other people.
His other wives.
Yeah, not being boring is a real thing for him.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, even in the first episode, towards the end, it's the two of you go at it in quite a kind of shocking, brutal way.
That's what happens in relationships. You fall in love with the person that you think and then you realise that they are actually a human being and not a perfect figment of your imagination. And I think that for Ian, I'm talking for your character, but that he doesn't even have he never sees her as a human being. He doesn't see human beings as human beings, basically. I think that's been taken away from him. Whereas she believes that, until the end, I think she believes, but we love each other.
Yeah, and also that perhaps she's complicit in the game that he thinks that they're playing, which is a sadomasochistic game, and in the end, she opts out, you know, and like I said earlier, I think it sort of destroys him. He's distraught by her choosing to leave.
Mm.
Yeah, he feels like genuinely stunned and amazed that she has her own personality.
I don't want to play the game anymore.
Play the game.
And that means the relationship is fundamentally and basically over. If you can't get at one another, and that's all you've got, then it's over, isn't it? Which is really sad.
Yeah. How important was it? It's sad.
In a really, really messy universe that they live in.
How important was it that those scenes and the whole thing was directed by a woman? You know, did you think that was an important element in the whole production?
I think it was really important that it was directed by this woman. I think Anne Sawicki she was phenomenal, and you could sense her quality the moment you met her. You know, she was the moment I met her to discuss it, she had such a clear vision of what she thought was going on in their relationship, and I also thought it was really interesting to pick somebody who wasn't an insider in the British class system and could see it with some sort of degree of separation from it. And I thought she was extraordinary as a director.
Yeah, I mean, I had to do quite a lot of, you know, sex stuff, which ordinarily is absolutely
horrifying.
Yes, and really kind of debasing as a human being. And what was really great was that when we were actually shooting it wasn't particularly, because the way that Anne was doing it and the way we were able to talk about it, she was like, basically this is going to be what's happening and it's going to be basically 2 seconds. That's all I need it for, which is so much more reassuring than a massive, vast landscape of time that you've got to fill with, like, I don't know, snogging and stuff.
Yes.
It was really amazing for me to talk to a woman who was interested in a story that had elements of female sexuality, and a woman who wanted to talk about that with me. And we would talk about it and have differing opinions about our experiences or what we wanted this to be like or what we wanted the narrative to be. And I think that really, for me, was amazing to have a shorthand with someone and also know that someone was never going to get in the edit and turn it into something else.
Right.
I think we both really felt like that when it came to that, she was totally on our side, and
100%.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I can't tell you what a relief it was for me. You know, I mean, I think sort of coming up making movies and shows in the 90s where it was a bit more like the Wild West. They're like, well, start making out with each other and we'll film you. And you're like, what? And I always had this suspicion that if there was nothing to talk about as far as the scene was concerned, there might not be a scene, you know, that actually is there.
Yeah, what are we doing?
And so she was really clear what, you know what? That's what when I watched it, I went, each of those scenes has a real point of view and purpose. And she was very clear about the purpose, the nature of whatever intimate sex scene was being shot.
Mm.
And how about the way it was written by Sarah Phelps? I mean, as well, you know, I think she's fascinated in all this stuff anyway, I think, isn't she, in sex and scandal and the role of women in society. What do you think she brought to this version of the story?
I think Sarah is a force of nature, and she's extraordinary, and I think what she does really, really well is writes a story. So when you read the scripts, you are reading something that reads like a novel in a way, because you're reading, it all flows into each other, and it's not really like reading a script. And also she's so funny, like she's funny to her bones. It's sort of everything she says is a line. When you meet her, everything she says is sort of, could be in a script.
She's an innate storyteller for whom that muscle, it just seems very easy for her. Like it's second nature for her, but also some really great pithy dialogue, you know, and sort of understood that it would just be a dirge to watch these people tear each other apart unless it had a sort of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf element to their cruelty with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a vein of kind of very dark humour, I feel, about those kind of moments, as there is in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I think there's something quite, it is entertaining, isn't it, to watch these two go at it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's cringe-worthy because you're thinking they hate each other. But there's something, what I love is there's one scene in particular where you see it turn from genuine hate into something like similar to desire for how much can I hurt you? How far are you going to let me go? What can I say that's too much? And then it gets to the point where it's not too much, and actually they could be intimate with each other, like they can be close, loving towards each other because of how disgustingly they've treated each other.
Yeah.
And similarly, when you arrive on set and it's all, you know, you're in the middle of this whole world of 1950s kind of creaking British aristocratic home, does it give you a feel of what it must have been like to step into a different world?
There was one when we did the party, when we did your daughter's party, where Anne was so funny because she absolutely loved that day because she just was like, more people, more supporting artists, get them in, making noise. And it was, when it's weird when you walk onto set and you're supposed to be walking through a scene and you like everyone parts like the Red Sea and you're like, oh, I'm in this, like it's supposed to be about me, but it was genuinely about them. That you realise that Anne was very good at creating the environment where those two, because we couldn't really walk into a room and the Red Sea would part, but making sure that the audience are aware that they are it, like this is their world.
Yeah, you can't act status. It has to be given to you.
Yeah.
And it was peculiarly heady stuff, partly because it was the middle of COVID and there were like 200 extras, and I was holding my breath the entire way through.
Yeah, hello! I know it was, yeah. But in a really amazing hotel.
And did you both get into the whole kind of truth of these historical figures? You know, there are so many rumours about them, for example, still, like, once you start reading about them, you can get lost, you know, like, did the Duchess really sleep with dozens, possibly hundreds of men, for example? Did the Duke kind of serially ruin women's lives? You know, did you kind of get into all of that? Yes, he did. Okay.
Yes, he did.
Fact.
Facts. Yes, but I've never wanted to let the truth get in the way of a good story. So, you know, I think that, yes, but also it's always going to be a fictionalized version of it. So I don't know whether the Duke, the real Duke, was sort of some malignant narcissist psychopath, or whether he was suffering from PTSD from, he was 70 pounds when he came back from prisoner of war camp, whether he was self-medicating. I don't know those things, but I can make assumptions that make it less boring to play and hopefully more entertaining to watch than just him being a bad guy for some reason.
Yeah, and I think that I had a slight problem with Margaret in the sense that the stories that you heard about her were so, like, a lot of them aren't in it, of things that she did and the way she behaved and how she propositioned people and things like that are just brilliant and really bold and kind of out there. But the difficulty is you're still receiving information about a person as opposed to someone exhibiting it yourself. Like all the interviews you see of her, she's incredibly straight-laced, she's incredibly proper, and you would never think that that woman was living some sort of kind of debauched sexual life outside of who she, you just don't, because that's the period of time and who she is. And so I found that really difficult, actually, because you don't want to try and make her into a modern person so people understand what she was like. You don't want to make her, fabulous and, incredibly promiscuous and kind of really flirty with absolutely everyone she meets, because that would be great. I mean, I really wanted to. That would have been amazing to be so overt, but she wasn't. She was, from what people said about her, but from the outside, from someone who's not educated about who she is, you wouldn't necessarily think, oh my God, she's a right goer.
Goer.
But you wouldn't know that. And so so you do rely on in that, sorry, I've really let this down, but you do rely on in that environment for that, hopefully what precedes the character, the knowledge that people have of that character informs how they view her as opposed to having to be.
Yeah, I think it does say something about Britishness, and particularly in that time, doesn't it? That both the kind of whole nature of the aristocracy, and how how the attitudes towards a woman who's traduced in the divorce case at the end, it all feels very British in a way.
I think it's the beginning of the end of that sort of reverence of don't touch, the portrayal of, which happens today with celebrity culture, but that sort of weird pact that there is about keep up our appearance of who we are because it sells your newspapers. And I think that was the beginning of the end of the press's kind of stepping back from people of that social class and letting them basically live their lives and printing what people want to read as opposed to what's actually going on. But unfortunately, it did happen with the bringing down of a woman who just wanted to not be married to a very, very mean person anymore. And that basically it was who's the worst person here? A man who sometimes abuses his wife and is incredibly cruel and in a divorce case, or a woman who has sex with men. And in that period of time, and still today, unfortunately, probably that is the thing that people think is more reprehensible than the other.
I think you've summed it up perfectly. Thank you so much, Claire and Paul. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.